Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1, Throwing, a Very Human Ability, written by Stumpy Jim.
Why are human arms so small?
Traxon turned to look at his friend, his long arms draped over the table in front of him. He followed his gaze and saw that a human just entered the pub, hands in pockets.
Of all the bizarre things humans have, resist, do, live, or whatever, why is it that they have the shortest arms of all the GR?
I don't know, Traxon huffed as he turned his eyes to his own arms, dangling low to the ground. He scanned around and found that everyone else had to have long arms.
I would pity them for having difficulty reaching for things, but then they jump so well, I doubt they would even have that as a problem.
Yeah, Traxon rubbed his head. Wonder why that is. The two went back to their drinks for a time, relaxing until a stool stood next to their table, and up hopped the human.
Hello!
The human beamed and placed a long straw to his mouth and sucked on it for a time. Heard you were talking about me. Traxon frowned for a moment. How do you know we were talking about you?
Human hearing.
The human chuckled, sucking on the tube straw again.
Right.
Traxon's friend's eyes narrowed, then looked around the table to see what the straw was attached to. Traxon was too curious about the odd straw, so he leaned over the table for a peek. He blinked with disbelief when he saw the massive keg the straw was feeding out of it. Yeah, the stuff you've got here is a bit weak, the human shrugged, but I guess you can't help it, when beer is classed a grade B controlled substance. So, I make do, right? Traxon and his friend stared at the human, shocked that Brinks, the drink notorious for binge drinking with the youth, was being drank by the keg by a human, and said human, thinking it was too weak. What were you talking about? The human asked.
Oh,
Traxon's friend cleared his throat.
Right. I was wondering why humans have such small arms.
Small? The human frowned, glancing at his arm. I suppose it is small, comparative, but there is a reason to it. What would that be? Well, it goes back to the hunter-gatherer days of humanity, the human began. As you know, unlike most other predatory types of sentience of the GR, we humans are endurance predators. Chase prey all day until they're exhausted, able to keep from overheating with sweat glands and so on. Right. Everyone knows that, Traxon nodded, taking a sip from his glass. But what do the short arms have to do with that? I'm getting to that, the human smirked. All of us sentients evolved to have similar features, to use tools in advance, right? Well, the primary tool humans used in the beginning was the spear.
You mean pointy sticks?
Traxon's friend scratched his nose.
Why would you need that?
Spears were used for hunting primarily, and war when needed, using them to stab and kill our prey after we corner it.
Makes sense.
But you see, in a lot of cases, trapping our prey was very difficult, since most of the time they congregated in large open areas. They would just run away far enough so that we could do nothing to them, and for the carnivore to attack us instead.
What does any of this have to do with your small arms?
Traxon's friend asked impatiently. I'm getting there, the human smiled. You see, a good advantage of a spear is reach, a long stick and a stick them into the pointy bit. But what's better about them is that they soar through the air faster than we can run. Even better with fletching, which then led to the bow and arrow. So, what we would do as hunters was throw our spears at our prey to impale them with the spears, getting them. Traxon and his friend looked at each other, then the human. Sorry, throw? Traxon worked the strange word in his mouth, finding the oddness of the human language working in his mouth. What do you mean? Right, sorry, the human laughed. I guess you wouldn't know that, since your bodies aren't really built for it. It's the reason why darts aren't in these places. Man, I miss playing darts. Can you explain then? The human frowned for a moment, then left Traxon and his friend. Later, he came back with a knife in his hand. It's really better with a demonstration. Would you get up, hold this knife, and chuck it as hard as you can at the headboard above the counter where you are? Traxon, just as he was told, stood up from the chair, taking the knife in hand. Right, so what you want to do is to try and make it stick in the wood, okay? Traxon didn't believe it was possible, not from where he was standing. Even with his long arms, there was no way they were long enough to reach the wood and make the knife stick. Pulling his arm back, he moved his arm forward and letting the knife go. As expected, it didn't go far, clattering to the ground. Good try, but don't feel bad. You and many of the other sentients don't have bodies built for such a maneuver, the human said, and he went to pick up the knife on the floor. He came back and faced the wood board above the counter, where he told Traxon to throw the knife. I'm fuzzy on the exact details, but human arms are built for explosive output, adding the maximum amount of energy when throwing something. It's reason why humans can throw things that can go 100 miles an hour, like a baseball. I believe that's about 367 L's.
No way.
Traxon's friend shook his head in disbelief.
Over 3 times the urban road speed limit applied to an object that you throw?
Yeah, the human nodded, his face calm. I can show you. Traxon and his friend watched the human, along with the rest of the pub, since the little display a few moments ago, wind up his arm, holding the knife by the blade. Then the arm blurred with a frightening speed, expanded outwards, knife no longer in his hand when it stopped. At the same time, there was a metal shuddering sound coming from the counter. There were gasps of shock and awe when everyone saw that the knife was stuck in the board tip first. See, human arms are built to efficiently transfer power into objects, so that if we throw something, it can go far and fast, the human said as he went to take the knife out the board, tossing it up in his hand. It's not exactly the best thing to throw. The weight is weird and unbalanced. Now you can imagine how much damage a spear can do to an animal or some other living creature when thrown by a human. Traxon and many of the patrons of the pub looked at their own large, long arms, shuddering at the thought of being impaled and killed by a long stick. Humans! The audible sigh came from the crowd. They're so weird. End of story. Story number 2. The Ape, the Alien, and the Underappreciated Reptile. Written by Louis Le Diamond. My nerves were screaming at me as I boarded the human transport. A human frigate patiently waited outside to guard me from the eldritch and unknown horrors of the universe. It was my first day as the Veada ambassador to Earth. I was more than qualified, but these humans were new, unknown, even with my animal friend Feda and my closest friend Jupiter at my side. I could not help but feel isolated. Feda was a flying reptile from my planet. Nobody understood my connection with her. An animal and a sentient, bonding. It was practically unheard of. But something about this reptile was friendly and inviting. A complete lack of judgment and expectation filled her heart. With the first contactor having made a stellar introduction to the humans, it was now my job to secure a peace deal and act as an ambassador and diplomat to these strange apes. The journey to Earth was long and uneventful. The horrors of the cosmos were sufficiently deterred by what the human technicians described as their massive fuck-off cannons, as to decide to simply watch our every move and not drag us into the unending void. Well, it wasn't entirely uneventful. On the first day of the journey, I was woken by Jupiter for breakfast, and what the funny apes called coffee, a delicious beverage that made electricity course through my body. As we enjoyed this exotic beverage, Jupiter's voice filled my ears.
Kelty, I still don't know why you brought that thing with you.
She gestured cautiously at Feda. Feda was a Tadari, with her twin wings as long snout and a beautiful colors on her scales. The humans hadn't even questioned her presence. I could only hope their silence was born of fear. That thing has a name. I brought her because she brings me comfort, and frankly, these primates are fairly poorly understood. I'm nervous.
But you're not scared they might eat her?
If they try, I'll firmly stand my ground that they cannot. I'm more worried she might fly off into the Earth's skies, to be honest. As my final words lingered, the hiss of the door to the small mess hall opened, and the same human technician who described the fuck-off cannons to me stepped inside. He was young for his species, with hair that looked like furry sand and eyes that matched the waves that would wash over it. His name, as I recalled, was John. And a second round of red fruits they called apples. He took one of the apples and offered it to Feda, who gleefully dug into it and ripped it apart. He rubbed his hand gently over her scales, much to her delight, as she tore into the fruit. Jupiter looked at the ape in confusion as he continued stroking Feda's colorful scales. This is a beautiful, bird thing you have, Mr. Calty. What's its name?
Her name is Feta. You don't plan on eating her, do you?
No. Why would I eat your pet? Jupia broke her veil of silence.
His what?
Well, I assume she's his pet, right? I mean, she seems to stay around him, and he has a name for her.
Now you're saying you've seen this sort of behavior before?
Well, yeah. Just about everyone on Earth has or has had a pet before. I have an overly dramatic husky back home named Juniper.
Wait, everyone has an animal that they just befriend?
Yeah. Doesn't the rest of the galaxy? Human societies are practically built on it. They even do jobs for us.
No, nobody does that. Galti had to fight off the government to smuggle this reptile to the ship.
Suddenly, my journey's isolation and my fear for Feda seems much less. If all the humans on Earth could understand my love for this animal, maybe this job would be way more interesting and fun. End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.